Captain Marcus Sterling had been guarding the royal family for 12 years. He knew every corner of the palace grounds, every shadow that moved at night and every face that belonged there. But today felt different. Something in the air made him uneasy as he walked his morning patrol around the outer gardens. The sun was just rising over the golden gates when he spotted her. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood pressed against the iron bars. Her small hands gripped the metal so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair hung in messy tangles around her pale face. Marcus slowed his steps. Children often gathered near the palace gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. But this girl was different. She wasn't looking at the palace at all. Instead, her wide eyes were fixed on something across the street with an intensity that made Marcus's stomach twist. He followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. A dark van sat parked under the shade of an old oak tree. The windows were tinted so black he couldn't see inside, and the license plate was covered with mud. Nothing about the vehicle belonged in this wealthy neighborhood where every car gleamed like a jewel. Marcus had seen enough suspicious activity in his years of service to trust his instincts. His hand moved instinctively toward his sword, though he kept the motion casual. He couldn't draw it without cause, but something told him he might need it soon. The girl hadn't noticed him approaching. She remained frozen in place, her small body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Marcus could see tears streaming down her cheeks, but she made no sound. It was the kind of silent crying that came from someone who had learned that making noise only made things worse. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you all right, little one?" The girl jumped at his voice, spinning around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Her eyes were huge and filled with terror that no child should ever have to feel. For a moment she looked like she might run away. But then she saw his uniform and the confusion on her face deepened. "You're a guard," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A real guard with a sword and everything." Marcus nodded, keeping his voice gentle. "That's right. I protect people. That's my job." "What's your name?" "Emma," she said, glancing nervously back at the van. "Emma Rodriguez. Well, Emma, you seem scared." "Can you tell me what's wrong?" The little girl's eyes darted between Marcus and the van again. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Her whole body was shaking now, and Marcus could see the internal battle playing out across her young face. She wanted to tell him something, but she was terrified. Marcus looked more carefully at the van. Through his trained eyes, he noticed details that would escape most people. The engine was running, even though no one had gotten in or out since he'd been watching. The driver's side window was cracked open just enough for someone inside to hear conversations from the street. Most telling of all, the van was positioned with a clear view of both the palace gates and the elementary school that let out in 2 hours. "Emma," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone while still remaining kind. "That van over there. Do you know something about it?" The girl's reaction was immediate and violent. She began crying harder, her small hands covering her face. Between her sobs, Marcus caught fragments of words that made his blood freeze in his veins. They said if I told anyone," she choked out between gasps. "But you have a sword. You can fight them, right? You can stop them?" Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense. In all his years of protection duty, he had faced threats from assassins, thieves, and even other soldiers. But something about this moment felt more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. The fear in this child's voice told him that whatever was happening involved more than just a suspicious vehicle. "Emma, I need you to tell me exactly what you know," he said firmly but gently. "I promise I will protect you, but I need to know what we're dealing with." The girl looked up at him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. She glanced once more at the van, took a shuddering breath, and prepared to speak words that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about his quiet morning patrol. "They're not here for the palace," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible for such a small person. "They're here for the princess, and they're going to take her when she comes out for her morning walk." Captain Marcus Sterling had been guarding the royal family for 12 years. He knew every corner of the palace grounds, every shadow that moved at night and every face that belonged there. But today felt different. Something in the air made him uneasy as he walked his morning patrol around the outer gardens. The sun was just rising over the golden gates when he spotted her. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood pressed against the iron bars. Her small hands gripped the metal so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair hung in messy tangles around her pale face. Marcus slowed his steps. Children often gathered near the palace gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. But this girl was different. She wasn't looking at the palace at all. Instead, her wide eyes were fixed on something across the street with an intensity that made Marcus's stomach twist. He followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. A dark van sat parked under the shade of an old oak tree. The windows were tinted so black he couldn't see inside, and the license plate was covered with mud. Nothing about the vehicle belonged in this wealthy neighborhood where every car gleamed like a jewel. Marcus had seen enough suspicious activity in his years of service to trust his instincts. His hand moved instinctively toward his sword, though he kept the motion casual. He couldn't draw it without cause, but something told him he might need it soon. The girl hadn't noticed him approaching. She remained frozen in place, her small body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Marcus could see tears streaming down her cheeks, but she made no sound. It was the kind of silent crying that came from someone who had learned that making noise only made things worse. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, crouching down to her level. "Are you all right, little one?" The girl jumped at his voice, spinning around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Her eyes were huge and filled with terror that no child should ever have to feel. For a moment she looked like she might run away. But then she saw his uniform and the confusion on her face deepened. "You're a guard," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A real guard with a sword and everything." Marcus nodded, keeping his voice gentle. "That's right. I protect people. That's my job." "What's your name?" "Emma," she said, glancing nervously back at the van. "Emma Rodriguez. Well, Emma, you seem scared." "Can you tell me what's wrong?" The little girl's eyes darted between Marcus and the van again. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Her whole body was shaking now, and Marcus could see the internal battle playing out across her young face. She wanted to tell him something, but she was terrified. Marcus looked more carefully at the van. Through his trained eyes, he noticed details that would escape most people. The engine was running, even though no one had gotten in or out since he'd been watching. The driver's side window was cracked open just enough for someone inside to hear conversations from the street. Most telling of all, the van was positioned with a clear view of both the palace gates and the elementary school that let out in 2 hours. "Emma," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone while still remaining kind. "That van over there. Do you know something about it?" The girl's reaction was immediate and violent. She began crying harder, her small hands covering her face. Between her sobs, Marcus caught fragments of words that made his blood freeze in his veins. They said if I told anyone," she choked out between gasps. "But you have a sword. You can fight them, right? You can stop them?" Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense. In all his years of protection duty, he had faced threats from assassins, thieves, and even other soldiers. But something about this moment felt more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. The fear in this child's voice told him that whatever was happening involved more than just a suspicious vehicle. "Emma, I need you to tell me exactly what you know," he said firmly but gently. "I promise I will protect you, but I need to know what we're dealing with." The girl looked up at him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. She glanced once more at the van, took a shuddering breath, and prepared to speak words that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about his quiet morning patrol. "They're not here for the palace," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible for such a small person. "They're here for the princess, and they're going to take her when she comes out for her morning walk." Marcus moved closer to the van, using the large oak trees along the street as cover. His training had taught him that the best way to handle a dangerous situation was to gather as much information as possible before acting. But with each passing minute, the risk to Princess Catherine grew larger. Through a gap in the van's window tint, Marcus caught sight of movement inside. He could make out at least 2 figures, and one of them appeared to be much smaller than the other. That had to be Miguel, Emma's brother, who was being forced to help with the kidnapping. Marcus's radio buzzed softly. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Hayes from Backup Unit 1. We're in position behind the flower shop. What are your orders?" "Hold position and wait for my signal," Marcus whispered back. "Do not move until I give the word. These people are holding hostages, so we need to be very careful." As Marcus spoke, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The second car he had spotted earlier was slowly moving closer to the palace gates. It was now parked directly across from the garden entrance that Princess Catherine often used. The trap was becoming clear. They planned to grab her when she was furthest from the main guard station. Marcus knew he had to act fast, but he also knew that one wrong move could result in the death of innocent people. He began to formulate a plan that would require perfect timing and a lot of luck. "Command, this is Captain Sterling," he said into his radio. "I need you to contact Princess Catherine immediately. Tell her to delay her walk by exactly 10 minutes, but make it seem like a normal scheduling change. Don't tell her about the threat yet." "Understood, Captain. Any specific reason for the delay?" "Tell her that the head gardener wants to finish watering the roses before she comes out." Something that sounds completely normal. While Marcus waited for confirmation that the princess had been delayed, he moved to a position where he could see both vehicles clearly. The men in the van were definitely getting impatient. He could see more movement inside, and the driver kept checking his mirrors. Suddenly, Marcus heard a sound that made his heart stop. From inside the van came the muffled voice of a young boy, clearly in distress. Miguel was trying to say something, but someone was preventing him from speaking clearly. "Please," the boy's voice carried faintly through the air. "She's just a kid too. Don't hurt her." That was all Marcus needed to hear. These criminals weren't just planning to kidnap the princess. They were willing to harm children to get what they wanted. The time for careful observation was over. Marcus pressed his radio button. "All units, this is Captain Sterling. We have confirmation that hostages are in immediate danger. Move to surround both vehicles, but do not approach until I give the signal." "Roger that, Captain," came the reply from Lieutenant Hayes. "Unit 2 is moving to block the rear exit. Unit 3 is approaching the second car." Marcus drew his sword quietly, the familiar weight of the blade giving him confidence. The weapon had been passed down through generations of royal guards, and its razor-sharp edge had never failed him in combat. Today it might be the difference between life and death for several innocent people. As he moved closer to the van, Marcus could hear more voices from inside. There were definitely at least 3 adults, and they were speaking in hushed but urgent tones. From what he could make out, they were reviewing their plan one final time. "When the girl comes out, Miguel signals us," one voice said. "Carlos grabs her at the garden gate while Tony starts the engine. We're gone in 30 seconds. What if there are guards?" another voice asked. "That's why we have the kid," the first voice replied coldly. "Any guards try to stop us, the boy gets hurt. Simple as that." Marcus felt anger surge through him. Using a child as a shield was beyond criminal. It was pure evil. He moved even closer, positioning himself where he could see the van's side door clearly. Through the window, he finally got a clear look inside. 3 large men sat in the van, and huddled between them was a boy who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Miguel looked terrified but was clearly trying to be brave. The boy kept looking toward the palace gates, and Marcus realized he was probably hoping his sister had successfully warned someone. One of the men was holding a radio, waiting for the signal that the princess was approaching. Another had his hand on what was clearly a weapon. The third man, the driver, kept the engine running and watched the street for any signs of police activity. Marcus knew he was facing a critical decision. He could wait for his backup units to get into perfect position, which might take another few minutes. But if Princess Catherine came out for her walk before then, the criminals would immediately know something was wrong and might hurt Miguel out of spite. Or he could act now, while the criminals still thought their plan was working perfectly. It would be dangerous, but it might be the only way to save everyone. Marcus made his choice. He stepped out from behind the tree and walked directly toward the van, his sword still sheathed but his hand ready to draw it at a moment's notice. It was time to put 12 years of Royal Guard training to the ultimate test. Marcus approached the van with the confident stride of someone who belonged in the neighborhood. To anyone watching, he looked like a guard doing his normal patrol. But his eyes were constantly calculating distances, escape routes, and potential threats. When he was about 10 feet from the van, Marcus suddenly changed direction and walked straight to the passenger side window. Before the men inside could react, he knocked firmly on the glass with his knuckles. "Excuse me," Marcus called out in a friendly voice. "I'm with Palace Security. We're checking all vehicles in the area this morning. Mind if I see some identification?" The reaction inside the van was immediate chaos. Marcus could hear urgent whispers and the sound of someone scrambling around. The man with the radio was speaking rapidly into it, probably warning his partners in the other car. "Just a minute," came a muffled voice from inside. "We're looking for our papers." Marcus knew they were buying time, probably trying to decide whether to run or fight. He also knew that Miguel was still inside, which meant he couldn't let them drive away. "No problem," Marcus replied, still keeping his tone casual. "Take your time. I'll just wait right here." As he spoke, Marcus caught Miguel's eye through the window. The boy was pressed against the far wall of the van, but he was clearly trying to communicate something. Miguel pointed toward the back of the van, then held up 3 fingers. He was telling Marcus there were 3 men, and probably indicating where they were positioned. Suddenly, the van's engine revved loudly. The driver had made his decision. They were going to try to escape. Marcus had about 2 seconds to act before they drove away with Miguel still inside. In one fluid motion, Marcus drew his sword and brought the pommel down hard on the passenger window. The safety glass spider-webbed but held together. The sound was loud enough to alert his backup units, and he could already hear running footsteps approaching from multiple directions. "Palace security! Turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle." Marcus shouted, no longer pretending this was a routine check. Instead of complying, the driver threw the van into gear and started to pull away from the curb. But Marcus was ready for this move. He grabbed onto the passenger door handle and ran alongside the van, using his sword to smash the side mirror. "Miguel!" Marcus yelled. "Get down and stay down!" Inside the van, Marcus could see the boy diving toward the floor just as one of the criminals raised what looked like a gun. The situation was spiraling out of control fast, but Marcus had committed to this course of action and there was no turning back. Lieutenant Hayes appeared from behind a parked car, his weapon drawn. "Stop the vehicle," he commanded. "You're surrounded." The van screeched to a halt as the driver realized that backup units were now blocking both ends of the street. Marcus could see Unit 3 approaching the second car, which was also trying to escape but found its path blocked. "Nobody has to get hurt here," Marcus called out, still gripping his sword. "Just let the boy go and we can talk about this." The passenger side window finally gave way completely, falling into the van in a shower of safety glass. Marcus could now see directly inside, and what he saw made him grip his sword tighter. Miguel was huddled in the corner, clearly terrified but unharmed. One of the criminals had his arm around the boy's shoulders, not in a threatening way but almost protectively. That had to be Carlos, who, according to Emma, was being forced to participate because his mother was being held hostage. The other 2 men were clearly the real criminals. They both had weapons and were looking around desperately for an escape route. The driver kept revving the engine as if he was planning to ram through the police blockade. "Listen to me," Marcus said, directing his words toward the man holding Miguel. "You're Carlos, right? Emma told me about your mother. We're going to help her, but first we need to make sure Miguel stays safe." Carlos looked up in surprise. He was younger than Marcus had expected, probably not much older than 20. His eyes were filled with the same kind of desperate fear that Marcus had seen in Emma's face. "You don't understand," Carlos said, his voice shaking. "If I don't do this, they'll kill my mama. They said they have people watching her right now." "And they lied to you," Marcus replied firmly. "That's what criminals do. They make you think you have no choice, but you always have a choice. Right now you can choose to protect Miguel instead of letting these men use him as a shield." The driver suddenly shouted something in Spanish, and Marcus saw him reach for what was definitely a weapon. There was no more time for negotiation. Marcus had to act immediately or someone was going to get seriously hurt. "Miguel, close your eyes and cover your ears," Marcus commanded, raising his sword. The boy immediately obeyed, and Carlos instinctively moved to shield him with his own body. It was exactly the opening Marcus needed. In one swift motion, he thrust his sword through the broken window and pressed the point against the driver's throat. "Drop your weapon or I'll drop you," Marcus said in a voice that left no room for doubt. "And tell your friend in the back seat to do the same thing." The van fell completely silent except for the sound of Miguel's quiet crying and Carlos whispering reassuring words to him in Spanish. The moment of truth had arrived, and Marcus could only hope that his years of training would be enough to save everyone. The driver's eyes went wide as he felt the razor-sharp point of Marcus's sword against his neck. His hand, which had been reaching for his weapon, froze in midair. Marcus could see the man calculating his options and coming to the same conclusion. There was no way to draw his gun faster than Marcus could push the sword forward. Smart choice, Marcus said calmly. Now use your left hand to very slowly place your weapon on the dashboard where I can see it. The driver complied, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood exactly how much danger he was in. The gun made a soft thud as it hit the plastic dashboard. Carlos, Marcus continued, never taking his eyes off the driver, I need you to grab that weapon and hand it out the window to Lieutenant Hayes. Carlos hesitated for a moment, looking between Marcus and the other criminal in the back seat who still hadn't surrendered his weapon. Carlos, look at me, Marcus said firmly. Your mother is going to be fine, but only if you help us end this safely. Miguel needs you to be brave right now. The young man took a shuddering breath, then reached across the driver and grabbed the gun. His hands were shaking as he passed it through the broken window to Lieutenant Hayes, who was standing ready with his own weapon drawn. Good man, Marcus said. Now I need you to tell your friend in the back seat to drop his weapon too. Carlos turned around and spoke rapidly in Spanish to the third criminal. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. The man in the back seat responded angrily, also in Spanish, and Marcus could tell he was refusing to give up. What's he saying? Marcus asked Carlos. He says they'll kill our mama anyway if we don't complete the job. He wants to try to grab the princess when she comes out. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Even with 2 of the 3 criminals neutralized, the plan was still active, and Princess Catherine would be coming out for her delayed walk in just a few minutes. Command, this is Captain Sterling. Marcus spoke into his radio while keeping his sword pressed against the driver's throat. I need immediate confirmation that Princess Catherine is still secure inside the palace. Roger, Captain. The princess is safe inside and has been advised of the situation. She will not be taking her walk this morning. The criminal in the back seat must have understood enough English to realize what that meant. Marcus heard him curse loudly, then saw him raise his weapon toward Carlos and Miguel. Carlos, get down, Marcus shouted. In that instant, several things happened at once. Carlos threw himself over Miguel, shielding the boy with his own body. Lieutenant Hayes moved closer to the van, trying to get a clear shot at the gunman in the back seat. And Marcus had to make a split-second decision about whether to maintain his hold on the driver or try to help Carlos and Miguel. The driver, seeing Marcus's momentary distraction, tried to grab for another weapon that had been hidden under his seat, but Marcus was ready for exactly this kind of move. Without hesitation, he brought the pommel of his sword down hard on the man's wrist, causing him to cry out in pain and drop the second gun. Hayes, can you get a shot? Marcus called out. Negative, Captain. Too much risk of hitting the hostages. The situation was reaching a breaking point. The criminal in the back seat was clearly becoming more desperate and dangerous with each passing moment. Marcus knew that desperate people made unpredictable choices, and unpredictable choices got innocent people killed. Listen, Marcus called out to the gunman in Spanish, using the basic phrases he had learned during his military service. No one has to die here. Put down your weapon and we can work something out. The man responded with a string of angry Spanish that Marcus didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. He wasn't interested in negotiating. Then Carlos did something that surprised everyone. He sat up, still keeping Miguel protected behind him, and began speaking to the gunman in rapid, passionate Spanish. Marcus couldn't follow the words, but he could hear the emotion in Carlos's voice. He was pleading, arguing, trying to convince the man to give up. What are you telling him? Marcus asked. I'm telling him about Emma, Carlos replied without turning around. About how scared she was this morning when she came to warn you. I'm telling him that our mama wouldn't want us to hurt innocent children to save her. She would rather die than know we became murderers. The effect of Carlos's words was immediate and powerful. The gunman's angry shouting stopped, and for a moment the van was completely silent. Marcus could see the man's reflection in the rearview mirror, and the expression on his face had changed from anger to something that looked almost like shame. He's lowering his weapon, Lieutenant Hayes reported quietly. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but he knew the situation wasn't over yet. The most dangerous moment in any standoff was often when the criminals realized they had lost. Sometimes they surrendered peacefully, but sometimes they decided to go down fighting. Carlos, I need you to keep talking to him, Marcus said. Tell him we're going to help find your mother, but we need his cooperation. As Carlos continued speaking in Spanish, Marcus heard the sound of approaching sirens. The local police were arriving to assist with the operation, which meant they would soon have the manpower to conduct a proper search for Carlos's mother. The gunman said something else in Spanish, and this time his tone was different. Defeated, but also relieved. "He's giving up," Carlos said, turning to look at Marcus for the first time. "He wants to know if you really mean it about helping our mama." Marcus met the young man's eyes and saw the same desperate hope that he had seen in Emma's face that morning. "I give you my word as a royal guard," he said solemnly. "We will find your mother and bring her home safely." The third criminal slowly raised his hands and placed his weapon on the floor of the van. Marcus could see tears in the man's eyes as he realized that his desperate gamble had failed, but also that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for a better outcome than anyone had imagined. Lieutenant Hayes moved quickly to secure the weapon, while Marcus kept his sword ready just in case. Within minutes, all three criminals were in custody and Miguel was free. The boy ran straight to Lieutenant Hayes, who wrapped him in a protective embrace while calling for medical attention. "Is he hurt?" Marcus asked, finally allowing himself to step back from the van. "He seems physically fine," Hayes replied, scared but unhurt. "Carlos did a good job protecting him." Marcus turned his attention to Carlos, who was sitting in the back of a police car with his hands cuffed, but not yet under arrest. The young man looked exhausted and confused, as if he couldn't quite believe that the nightmare was finally over. "Carlos," Marcus said, approaching the police car, "I need you to tell us everything you know about where they're keeping your mother." Carlos nodded eagerly. "They have a house about 20 minutes from here. It's on Maple Street, number 847. There are 2 more men guarding her, but they're not as dangerous as these ones. They're mostly just watching to make sure she doesn't escape." Marcus immediately radioed the information to command, who passed it along to the police units that were already heading to search for Mrs. Rodriguez. Within an hour, they had confirmation that she had been found safe and unharmed. The reunion between Carlos, Miguel, and their mother was one of the most emotional moments Marcus had witnessed in his 12 years as a royal guard. Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't stop crying as she held her 2 children, and even some of the hardened police officers had to wipe their eyes. "Thank you," she said to Marcus in heavily accented English. "Thank you for saving my boys." "Don't thank me," Marcus replied. "Thank your daughter. Emma is the real hero here. She was brave enough to ask for help when her family needed it most." Emma had been waiting at the palace gates throughout the entire ordeal, and when she saw her family together again, she ran faster than Marcus had ever seen anyone run. The sight of the little girl throwing herself into her mother's arms was something that would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. Over the following days, the full scope of the criminal operation became clear. The 3 men who had planned to kidnap Princess Catherine were part of a larger organization that specialized in targeting wealthy families and government officials. They had been planning the princess kidnapping for months, studying her routines and identifying the perfect moment to strike. But their plan had one fatal flaw. They had underestimated the love and courage of a family that refused to be torn apart by fear. Carlos and Miguel were not charged with any crimes. As the investigation clearly showed, they had been coerced into participating. The 3 real criminals were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and the information they provided led to the arrest of several other members of their organization. Princess Catherine personally thanked Emma for her bravery, and the royal family established a scholarship fund in the girl's name to help other children from her neighborhood attend good schools. Emma used the attention to become an advocate for other families dealing with crime and violence, showing the same courage at age 8 that many adults never managed to find. Marcus was commended for his handling of the situation and was promoted to head of the Royal Guard's Special Protection Unit. But the real reward, he often said, was knowing that he had helped keep a family together when they needed it most. Carlos found a legitimate job working with the palace's community outreach program, helping to identify and prevent crime in the neighborhoods around the royal grounds. Miguel returned to school and eventually became a police officer himself, inspired by the men and women who had saved his family. Mrs. Rodriguez opened a small restaurant that became famous throughout the city for its authentic cuisine and warm atmosphere. She never forgot to thank the Royal Guard who had believed her daughter's story and acted on it when it mattered most, and Emma grew up to become exactly what everyone expected: a fierce protector of those who couldn't protect themselves, just like the Royal Guard who had once drawn his sword, because a little girl had the courage to speak the truth when it mattered most. Years later, when people asked Marcus about the most important day of his career, He never talked about ceremonies or awards or meetings with foreign dignitaries. Instead, he talked about a scared little girl who held onto iron gates with white knuckles and found the courage to trust a stranger with a sword. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. The dark van was eventually sold at police auction, but the story of what happened that morning became legend among the royal guards. It served as a reminder that their job wasn't just about protecting the royal family. It was about protecting anyone who needed help, especially those too small to protect themselves. Marcus kept his sword sharp and his eyes open, knowing that evil could come in many forms, but also knowing that courage and love were always stronger in the end.